What's up, Coach? This is Dan Kelly here with comic legend, I think it's fair to say, Bob McLeod, who has been gracious enough to agree to do an interview with us. So how are you doing this evening, sir?
Very well, thanks. Just getting over COVID.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I myself am dealing with a respiratory infection, so I have a pile of cough drops here.
Yeah. Yeah, there's COVID building back up around the country, and I think I picked some up at Baltimore Con actually.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Thankfully,
I'm fine. I'm doing better now.
well, that's good. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. When you first broke into comics, if I'm correct, it was in the early 70s with Marvel as an inker. What was it like working in the industry, but especially for Marvel back then?
I mean, especially in retrospect, looking back at the time, I didn't know any better and didn't really appreciate what a special opportunity that was. But in retrospect, it was amazing. It was a small company back then owned by Cadence, and it was almost like a little family operation. My desk was like 10 feet from John Romita's office,
Wow.
and Stan Lee's office was just, around the corner down the hall a little ways. Marie Severin, same thing the other direction. And I was working in production originally, just doing lettering and art corrections. And I had Mike Esposito in a desk next to me and Frank Giacoia on the other side of me, both longtime Marvel inkers. Um, Learned a lot from them. I learned how to hand letter from Danny Crespi and Mori Kuramoto. They're top letterers that did all the designs for the logos on the comics. It was just a friendly, I thought, friendly, easygoing atmosphere. Great way to break into the business.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it would have been a really good time with just working around all of those just comic legends there.
Yeah, and you could just hang around the office all day. There was nobody rushing you away, making you sign in or out or anything. It was very informal. I got a lot of my early jobs just from being there and saying, "Yeah, I'll take that."
That's awesome. Um, I think it's fair to say that you're probably, through all the years you work in comics, you're probably most well known for co-creating the New Mutants with Chris Claremont, which was the first X-Men spin-off book before we got the million that we have today. So how was it that you got involved in that project with him?
That was 1982. When I started in 74, so quite a while after I got started. And around 1979, my career really kind of started taking off big time, and I was doing a lot of fill-in issues, and I did a couple issues of the X-Men, penciling and doing some inking as well, that the editor Louise Simonson liked and Chris liked. And my very first penciling job in a color comic was a job that Chris had written, for Marvel Team Up number 86 with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So he was familiar with my work, and they liked what I did on the X-Men, and they were needing an artist on the X-Men at that time, and so they actually offered the X-Men to me as regular penciler,
Oh,
which would have been my first regular penciling assignment. And then they just kind of said, "Well, we also have this spin-off we're going to be doing of a younger team of X-Men. Hasn't got a title yet. But you could be co-creator on that." An amazing offer.
yeah.
But I really wanted to draw the X-Men because the X-Men was, very popular book, with a good track record and good royalties. And for all I knew, this new book would die after a few months and never go anywhere. And it was kind of a gamble, but I figured, when would I get another chance like that to be co-creator on a new series? So I had to take it.
That's awesome. And one of the things I noticed, you did get to draw Wolverine in the at least sort of Wolverine as a projection in the their first appearance.
Yeah.
Um, so when the team was introduced, it was 5 characters, but it was 3 female characters and 2 male characters. So having a team more female based than male based, even still today, is somewhat uncommon. So was that a conscious choice that the two of you made, or did it just kind of come about that way as you were designing the characters?
Well, Chris is well known for his female characters,
Yeah.
and he and I remember this differently, I think. I remember it being my idea to have more female characters because up until that time, there was like a token female in the groups, and I liked drawing females, and I just thought it would be cool to have more girls on the team than guys. So in my memory, I remember suggesting that to Chris, but I think he remembers it as his idea. But whatever. We both thought it was a good idea and wanted to go with it.
That's awesome. And they all had their, even though they all wore the same costume, they all still had their, unique design aspects to them.
Well, we had to decide, are they going to have individual costumes or have a team uniform? There was a lot of decisions that we talked over that had to be made still, how the characters, their powers were going to manifest themselves, what exactly their uniforms were going to look like, if they were going to have uniforms, what the name of the series was going to be. There were all kinds of decisions that had to be made.
Um, I read somewhere that since you penciled and inked their first appearance in Marvel graphic novel #4, that you had finished penciling it before you got married, but when you went on your honeymoon, you had to take it with you and finish inking it there. I got to ask, what did your new wife think about that? When you guys went on your honeymoon and you're bringing all these comic pages with you to work on there.
Yeah, they were going to give the inking away to Armando Gil because the deadline was so tight. When it was going to be a regular comic, it wasn't even scheduled, and I was going to have all the time in the world to do my very best work. And then we decided to make it a graphic novel. They were needing projects to become graphic novels at that time, and they thought it would be a good choice. So we were excited about it being a graphic novel, but that was like suddenly I had to do 50 pages instead of 20, and the graphic novel had a already set deadline, and it was already behind deadline because they had been searching around for a project. So instead of having all the time in the world, I had to rush through the penciling of the graphic novel, and then they were going to give away the inks, and I said, "Oh, this is a graphic novel. It's a new series. You got to let me ink it myself." And of course, at that time, I was much more established as an inker. My inking career was kind of at its peak, or at least, I had just become really established as a top inker. I really wanted to do the inking. So they said, well, you can do it, but we got to have it by so and so. And I just happened to be getting married at the same time. And so uh, I had to ink it during our honeymoon. And very luckily, a friend of my wife's had a beach house in Anna Maria Island in Florida, and allowed us to use her beach house for our honeymoon. And so we had it like, I think we were there for a month. So it's not like we just had a couple nights where I was rushing through these inking pages. My wife would go sit on the beach during the day and I would work on the pages, and then we'd be together in the evenings.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive honeymoon, though. A month.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
That's
Although there happened to be a hurricane at that time
oh
also,
no.
and the air conditioning didn't work, and it was really hot.
Ooh.
So the first night we actually ended up going to something like a budget motel or something, because it was also Memorial Day weekend.
Oh,
Every hotel for miles around was already booked. We couldn't go back to, I had a house at the time. We couldn't go back to my house because our friends were staying there for the wedding. So we had no place to spend our wedding night.
oh
We
man.
had to go to a little cheap hotel for the night of our wedding.
Well, the artwork on on the graphic novel is spectacular. One of my favorite parts of it is the introductory scene of Cannonball when he's going down, especially the facial expressions you drew on him. You know, when he's realizing, all right, you know, they kind of have the dialogue about how someone was saying, like, I thought you were going to college. And he's like, well, my dad died, so I got to take over and provide. I'm going to make the dream happen for one of my siblings. And like the facial expressions that you got on him, you know, kind of consigning himself to that. And then, you know, the fear when the mind starts caving in and then him rescuing the guy, like, is just fantastic stuff.
Thanks so much. I credit a lot of my facial drawing to Mort Drucker. I was a big
Mm-hmm.
fan of Mad Magazine growing up and studying his caricatures, not just of the faces, but he would caricature the whole body. So I early on was very aware of facial expressions and the differences in people's you know, facial anatomy, the size of their nose or the distance between the nose and the mouth and all this stuff. And I learned a lot from, even though it's not, well, Mark Drucker started out as a serious, more serious comic artist as well, and ended up in Mad Magazine. But I learned a lot from studying his work.
Well, you said that it was originally just going to be a typical comic, and then they decided to make it the 50-page graphic novel, and you had that much more work to do. So was the initial story changed in any way because of that, or was it just saying, okay, well, we're just going to combine the first 2 or 3 issues into one story and do the whole thing, or did it have to be reworked in some other way?
Well, you know, Chris is a very, I don't know how to say it. He's just bursting with ideas. So I'm sure he had already plotted out ideas for what he wanted to do in the series beyond the first issue. But he was rewriting as I was drawing the pages also. So there's a lot of changes that were made, uh, combining pages, you know, leaving out a page or whatever, uh, that I had started drawing or that I had drawn and had to redraw to make it work in the graphic novel as opposed to the comic. So it was, both of us were kind of working on the fly at the last minute, you know, rushing to get this graphic novel done.
Well, I saw somewhere, or I read somewhere that that said that, you know, you were the penciler and the inker on the graphic novel, and then you were the penciler on the regular series for the first few issues, but you had to give it up because you couldn't, you know, you couldn't keep up going at the monthly pace, but you stayed on for a while as an inker. What was the transition like being a co-creator of the characters, going from, you know, handling the main art responsibility with drawing it to then inking Sal Buscema, who came on to pencil it after you?
Well, what happened was that was my first regular penciling assignment. So I had done a few fill-in issues of different comics, Spider-Man, before then, but I was still learning my storytelling and working out my figure poses, and I needed time to really think of how I was drawing the book, which I didn't have because we were so rushed through the graphic novel and had jumped right on the first issue, the second issue, third issue. Um, and my inker on the series was also kind of an inexperienced inker, and also was rushed and having to work through my rushed pencils. Um, so he was having a tough time, and I just didn't like the way the art was looking, especially since I had started my career as an inker. The finished look of the art was very important to me. Um, and so I just felt dissatisfied with how the art was looking. And so I asked the editor if I could switch from penciling to inking, thinking I could control the look of the work better if I was inking, because I was very confident in my ink style. Um, and my inker seemed to be having trouble giving me the look I wanted when I was just doing pencils. So I switched over to inking, and I said, just give me somebody to do breakdowns, and I'll make it look like my work anyway. And so they got Sal Buscema, and Sal, I think, was inking one or two other books as well per month at that time. So he wasn't as invested in the comic as I was, and was doing a lot of medium shots. He's a very good storyteller and a very good artist, but his storytelling was much different than mine. Um, and I felt like it was my book, so I could make it look how I wanted. So I took over quite a bit when I was inking his breakdowns. And then after a few issues, uh, I just decided I wasn't, again, happy with the way things were going. So I lasted up through issue number 8, I think it was, and did a couple covers after that. But I just decided I wanted to move on to different projects and do something where I could do the penciling and the inking.
Now, yeah, one thing I wanted to ask too is you did pencil several books over the years, like Star Wars and Action Comics and New Mutants, and you mentioned X-Men earlier, though you primarily worked for most of your career as an inker. Was it what made you choose inking over penciling more? Was it just a speed thing or a comfort thing, or?
A little bit of everything. I think it was mostly the editors really valued me as an inker and didn't want to, at the time in the 70s mainly, there weren't a lot of uh, inkers around. Uh, so, you know, especially, what they considered the top inkers. So they needed me as an inker more than they needed me as a penciler. Um, and I was having a good time inking. I love inking and was inking on some good projects. Um, so it's not like I was really choosing one over the other. The inking work was offered to me, whereas if I wanted to do penciling, I kind of had to ask for it. Um, I mean, they offered me Star Wars. That was same editor, Louise Simonson, who I had worked with on the New Mutants. So she offered me Star Wars. But later on, when I did um, Superman, that came about because they needed a new artist on Superman, and I was happily inking Dale Keown and on the Hulk. And Jerry Ordway came up to me at Marvel at the office one day and said he really enjoyed my penciling. Why didn't I do more penciling? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, would you want to try penciling Superman? And sure, I had read Superman comics mostly when I was a kid. So I was very excited about that chance. So I left the Hulk and started working on Superman. And so I went after penciling to some degree, but mostly I was living down in Florida and raising a family, and tended to just take whatever jobs they called me and offered me, rather than trying to direct my career in a certain direction. So I ended up doing a lot of penciling, probably more penciling than people realize, but mostly inking just because that's what they offered me the most.
And you also, as an inker, helped launch the Man of Steel book with Louise Simonson as well, right?
Yeah, Louise and I got along great, and that was when I was working on Superman, and I did a few different Superman books. I did some work on Adventures of Superman, and I penciled and inked one of the annuals. I did the issue of the Man of Steel. There was a small group of us working on Superman, so that just came up at the time that I was there.
Now you work for both Marvel and DC a lot. Um, Was there a noticeable difference between the two companies, or was it just comic work?
In the beginning, in the early 70s, there was a big difference, I thought. DC was much more kind of, I felt kind of, I don't know what the word would be, stuffy. The editors were older, the artists were older for the most part. Whereas Marvel was this young company kind of just starting out and competing with them and trying to shake up the industry. And there was more excitement to working at Marvel. Um, but then once artists and writers and editors started bouncing back and forth between the two companies, they became pretty much the same. You were working for the same people and with the same people a lot of time. Um, so there wasn't that much difference anymore. And then, Disney took over Marvel. It became more corporate. So sometimes it was actually more fun to work for DC than for Marvel.
Wow. Now you started working in the 70s and you worked through the 80s, the 90s into the 2000s. How do you feel about the comics in the industry and how it's changed and progressed over the years?
It's changed so much. I felt like it changed every decade, basically. Um, the kinds of books we were doing, when I started in the 70s, there was almost every genre in a top book. We had horror comics and humor comics and romance comics and westerns and sci-fi. We had kung fu comics even. Uh, Superheroes were just one of the various genres, and they slowly kind of took over the industry, kind of shuffled off the rest of the genres to the back seat. And then digital, computers came in, and that changed the whole look of everything. And the hand lettering went away to become computer fonts, and coloring became digital. So many things changed about it. The pencils got tighter, so the inking involved a lot more tracing. Whereas in the 70s, they the pencilers didn't expect you to be tracing their pencils. They wanted the inker to bring something to the table. They wanted us to have a style that we were contributing to the look of the art and making them look better and kind of dressing up the pencils and refining the pencils. And then over time in the 80s and 90s, pencils got so tight they started printing from the pencils, not leaving a lot of creativity for the inker to contribute. So the whole job of the inker changed, job of the penciler changed. You know, I think the writing, as new writers came in, they wanted to do something different instead of what had been done before. So they didn't want to have Peter Parker be a high school student. They wanted him to get married. They wanted to have a female Captain America or whatever. They kept wanting to do things that hadn't been done yet, which is understandable. But the comics just kept changing so much all the time, and they got darker. Maybe with the advent of Dark Knight by Frank Miller, the whole writing and art of the comics got more violent and more adult. Same thing from the mass market over to direct sales contributed to that. Started marketing more to adults instead of to the general population. And I started out as a humor artist, and I have always been more of a fan of the lighter stuff rather than that dark, violent stuff. So, like I said, Superman rather than you know Batman or Wolverine, um, or characters like Deadpool. Just he can be fun, but he's just not my kind of character.
Yeah.
I like the less serious, less violent stuff. Um, I mean, they've changed in just about every way, every respect you can think of.
Well, you talked about some fun stuff and working for Marvel and DC. In 1997, they did something that, I know all the fans thought was really fun was when they combined the universes and did the amalgam universe. And you worked on one of the books. You penciled some of the Iron Lantern issue on the first round of amalgam books. What did you think of the concept of them combining the characters to do that? And I also noticed on the Iron Lantern book that there were like 6 or 7 different guys that inked that book. So why were there so many inkers on that one issue?
I think I only did inking on that series. I don't think I did penciling on Iron Lantern. It was a deadline thing. That's usually what happened when they had more than one inker. It was just because the penciler was late, probably, and they needed to meet the deadline, so they would bring in more than one inker to get it on schedule. But I didn't do that much on that stuff. I basically stuck with Marvel and DC most of my career, but I did try other companies. I did a couple comics for Pacific Comics. I did one for Dark Horse. Every time I tried to go away from Marvel and DC, though, I had trouble getting paid.
Oh,
So I would go back to Marvel and DC because you could guarantee you would get a paycheck with them. A CrossGen, I didn't do any for CrossGen. There was another one. What was the other one I worked on? I did something for First Comics and Bob Layton's comic book company. There was a
Valiant.
one down in Florida. Oh, Techno Comics. I did
Okay.
some work for. But I always ended up coming back to Marvel and DC because that's where the paychecks were.
Yeah, I mean, when that's what your profession is, that's that's what you got to count on.
Well, I was trying to find somewhere that I could pencil and ink so where I didn't have such a fast monthly deadline. So when I went to other companies, I would try to get penciling and inking. I also worked for the Swedish publisher of the Phantom, Egmont, and was penciling and inking that for a couple of years.
Um, you worked with a lot of different creators over the years, writers, artists. Are there any favorites that you had working with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Mike Zeck and I always got along well. I always enjoyed working on Mike Zeck's work. Um, and probably my favorite to ink over was John Buscema because mainly I would work over his breakdowns, but even his pencils weren't that tight. And he would give you such a solid foundation that you could just build on that. And you didn't have to worry about trying to correct his anatomy or anything. Everything was done so well, you could just add to it. So he was a pleasure to ink. Basically, anybody that drew well was fun to ink. Um, as far as the inkers on my pencils, I worked with some of the best inkers in the business, Joe Rubenstein and Tom Palmer, Brett Breeding. But I never really thought they were inking it quite the way I wanted it to look, even though they were excellent inkers. It wasn't my inking. So
Yeah.
I wanted it. I had a definite idea of how I wanted my art to look. So I always wanted to pencil and ink myself whenever I could.
Were there any writers that you particularly enjoyed working with that you thought gave you some really interesting stuff to draw?
I really had fun working with Peter David. He and I did an issue where Spider-Man goes out in the suburbs and can't find any tall buildings to swing from. So there was some humor in that issue, and I had a lot of fun with it. I did, I think, another issue or two with Peter David. Chris was always easy to work with. He was said he was willing to, his stuff was very dense, so sometimes I would have to edit it down a little bit to make it fit into the number of pages that we had to draw. And he said that was fine. He'd rather give me too much than too little. So he was always easy to work with.
Are there any creators that you wanted to work with, you didn't get a chance to, or were there any characters that you really wanted to work on their books, but you just never, again, never got the chance to work on them?
Well, I mean, everybody wanted to, as an inker, wanted to ink Joe Kubert, and that was kind of hard to come across. So I never got to ink Joe Kubert or Neil Adams. Um, Jim Aparo would have been fun to ink. I inked one little half of a job over Jim late in his career. Um, probably probably those are the only ones that I. Oh, Gil Kane, I would like to have done a lot more over. I only inked him a couple times on covers. I did a couple pages of him in the wedding issue of Superman and Lois. Um, I guess that's about the only ones though that I really missed.
Were there any characters that you particularly wanted to work on their books or wanted to draw in an issue you did work on that you just didn't get a chance to?
I mean, I never got a chance to really pencil Batman. Uh, Again, it's not something I was dying to do, but I kind of feel like I missed him because I worked on so many different characters, you know. I would have liked to pencil Howard the Duck because, like I said, I like humor, and I inked a few things over Howard, but I never got to do any penciling on him. Um, that's probably it.
So you said you like the humor stuff. Did you enjoy doing that more than the superhero stuff?
Actually, yeah. I mean, my favorite work from my career was what I did for Crazy Magazine with the Teen Hulk. I mean, I just had a lot of fun on that stuff, penciling and inking and lettering, adding gray tones. So I was kind of in total control of the artwork, and it was kind of more Mad Magazine type of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I did like 4 or 5 movie satires for Crazy Magazine. Couple different things. That stuff is just fun. Whereas superhero, more dramatic stuff can be fun, but it's a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
it's harder work.
I imagine that you have to be a lot more realistic in your anatomy and buildings and cars and all that. Whereas in humor, if you draw it wrong, it's like, oh yeah, I meant to. It's
Well, there's not quite. I mean, you can be more flexible with reality and humor. I still tried to do everything with the same integrity and make it as good as I could, but you have less leeway with realistic stuff. So, you worry more about making sure the rear view mirrors on a car are right, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Is the gun authentic looking? Those kind of things that you don't have to worry about so much in the humor.
Well, I know that you're not currently working in the industry. When you would message with me when we set this up, you said you're just doing commissions and convention sketches. But um, is there one thing that is there one project that would be able to draw you back in to working professionally? Maybe not ongoing, but at least one project that would be able to draw you back into doing it.
Probably. I mean, I'm not looking for work in comics, but I've never really turned down jobs from Marvel or DC. Um, Everybody in the world basically wants to work for Marvel and DC, so I feel like an idiot if I turn them down. And I enjoy working for them. Last year, I did a little Craven the Hunter job for Marvel, pencils and inks. So it's not like I don't want to ever do any more comics. I'm just pursuing other things right now. I'm trying to do some paintings of
No.
non-comic stuff like landscapes or portraits, whatever. Um, if Marvel, say, offered me a Western to draw or another New Mutants miniseries or DC asked me to come back and draw some more Superman, I would have a hard time turning them down.
Have you ever thought about doing anything creator owned, especially nowadays, where not just with the proliferation of independent companies, but with things like Kickstarter, where creators can just go and produce it and fund it themselves? Have you ever thought about doing a creator owned project?
I did actually do a superhero alphabet book,
Oh yeah,
children's book for HarperCollins. And if I was going to do more stuff outside of penciling and inking from Marvel or DC, I would probably try to do another children's book. I don't really want to. I'm not looking to do more uh, comics work. It's a lot of tiny little panels and tiny little figures and details. It's more fun doing covers and larger drawings. Um, like I said, and right now my interest is just more in painting than comics.
but you do the commissions and the convention sketches. What's the strangest request you've gotten for doing a commission?
I get some pretty bizarre requests. I don't know if I want to get into the strangest one. I've had several strange ones over my career. Some that I've refused to do,
Yeah,
and some that I've done just because they were so strange. I thought it would be kind of a kick to do them. Everybody that gets commissions uh, has certain things that really appeal to them about comics, and so they want a very individualized piece of art, uh, catering to their tastes. So sometimes that's fun to do. Um, you just it runs the gamut. There's all kinds of stuff that people want you to draw.
well, has anybody ever come to you with an idea for something they wanted you to do as a commission where you've gone like, wow, that's I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that's a really cool idea, like combining two characters, or a certain type of scenario that they wanted done?
One of my favorites that I did was Craven the Hunter. This guy wanted me to draw Craven with his trophy wall. So
Oh,
that he collects trophy walls of different characters, and so I had all the characters that he had defeated in battle, Spider-Man and whoever, up their heads on trophy plaques up on this wall. And then he said, "Well, why don't you do one with the villains?" And so I did a companion piece of Craven with all the villains up on the wall that he had defeated.
that's pretty cool.
And so kind of there's like a mirror image of the two of them. He's sitting in a chair and both of them, and the walls are behind him. And I put a lot of work into those. So those were fun to do. I did another one. This guy wanted Modoc and said, just have some fun with Modoc, do something unusual with him. So I kind of did a riff on John Carter of Mars with Modoc, with a sword, and there's a girl hanging onto his leg, and like a John Carter cover that I did a little watercolor of for that one. There's all kinds of fun stuff when you do commissions. One of the things I like about them is because each one is different. You're not drawing Spider-Man every month, or you're not drawing Craven over and over and over again. You're doing something different with every commission.
Now you mentioned Craven a couple times. You inked all 6 parts of Craven's Last Hunt, didn't you?
Yeah, that was a really great job. Mike Zeck came to me and offered it to me. He thought he's always liked my inking, and he thought it would be the right look for this series that he was doing with Craven and Spider-Man. And he started out doing super tight pencils for him. Um, so I was kind of intimidated by how much work it was going to be, because very detailed stuff on the covers. He did all the covers first. Um, but after about 3 issues, I don't know if deadline reasons or what, but he switched over to just doing breakdowns. So allowing me to contribute a lot more to the finished look of the art. which is what I always enjoyed more than just straight inking. That was a series that I really enjoyed working on, and it's amazing it's had and how it's retained its popularity all these years.
Did you have an idea of when you were working on it, what an iconic storyline that was going to be? Maybe, some consider it, not just one of the best comic storylines of all time. Some people consider it the best Spider-Man story. When you were working on it, did you have any idea of like, yeah, this is going to be, something that, goes down as one of the best all time?
I didn't really think of it in that term, but of course, when you're working on something, if it's special and if the quality is kind of above average, so I could tell right away it was a really well written story, and Mike was doing some amazing pencils on it, and it was in all three Spider-Man titles. So that right there told me, well, this is pretty special. They've never done that before. Um, but none of us had any idea that it was going to become the classic that it has. So we're all proud of our work on it. But when you're working on something like that, I was focused on just trying to do a good job on it. I wasn't really thinking that much about what impact it was going to have on the readers. I'm just always focused on doing the best that I can.
Well, you all did a fantastic job on that storyline. But you mentioned the one good thing about doing commissions is you don't have to draw Craven every month, or you don't have to draw Spider-Man every month. You get to do a lot of different things. Who would you say your favorite character is to draw?
I like drawing people. I was never. I'm not your typical comic artist in that I'm not that much of a fan the way so many of the comic artists are. I mean, I am a fan. I enjoy comics. I enjoy superheroes. Um, but the main thing I enjoy is just the drawing, not
Mhm.
the characters so much. So it didn't make that much difference to me what character I was working on. When I was working on Superman, I enjoyed drawing the secondary characters more than Superman. Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen and Perry White and all those, um, because they're more like real people, which to me is more interesting. And maybe that comes out of my Mad Magazine background too. I enjoyed making individual people rather than someone like Superman who has to look like a hero instead of like a normal person.
Yeah.
So I was always more interested in drawing normal people.
Are there maybe not any characters that you don't like drawing, but are there any particular things that when it comes time to drawing, you're like, oh God, I hate drawing horses. Oh, I don't want to draw Lobo. Like, is there anything that like that where you just would um, avoid it if possible?
Yeah, I don't like drawing guns mainly because they have to be a certain size compared to the figure, and it's hard to get reference always for exactly what size the gun is compared to a figure. And when you look up reference for a certain gun, it's always profile, and you say, well, what does the other side of the gun look like?
Yeah,
What does it look like from above or below or from the front or what? It's hard to find really good reference on weapons, so I'd rather just not bother with them. Um, I
yeah.
don't
And
mind cars.
if you start looking at googling them too much, you might get put on a watch list.
Yeah, that's true too. I don't mind drawing cars, but like helicopters and boats and jeeps and all kinds of trucks. It's just anything that's real that requires a whole lot of reference. I just rather would draw, uh, Conan out in the middle of the desert
Yeah.
than all this machinery.
Um, you said while you still do the commissions that you've been doing a lot of painting and a lot of landscape stuff. Do you Do you have that stuff that's out there for sale? I know you have the, like you said, the commissions and the convention sketches that you do, but do you have the paintings out there as well?
I've done some painting commissions for the fans, but not many, just a couple. And the other paintings that I've been doing mainly for myself. So just to hang up in the living room or to give to one of my kids. Eventually, I'm hoping to do enough paintings to have some that I want to sell to the public. And imagine eventually, if I keep at it, I'll do some to sell to comic fans. I'll, more fantasy oriented paintings that I can sell at a convention. But right now, I'm just kind of trying to have fun with painting and just painting for myself.
I mean, that's what art's supposed to be, essentially, isn't it? Is you draw or you paint whatever it is you like to do.
Ideally,
Yeah,
as a comic artist, you're basically a commercial artist, and you have to please an editor or a publisher or the fans or whoever. You're basically drawing for other people what they have expectations about how your art should look. Um, so you can, to an extent, uh, do it the way you want to do it, but you're basically, it's a job rather than someone who's a fine artist just painting or drawing whatever they please, and then people find them and they either like it or they don't.
yeah. Well, normally at this point, I would ask, whoever we're interviewing if you had any upcoming projects or anything you wanted to plug. But as you said, since don't have any projects coming up, do you have any convention appearances coming up that you want to let people know about that you'll be at, or
Sure. I'm going to be going to Lisbon, Portugal, actually, the end of October for the Amadora Festival. I'll be there for a couple days, and then in December I'm going to be at GalaxyCon in Ohio, in Columbus. Um, then I'll be at in the new year. I'll be at this new convention. I'm not sure what the name of it is yet, if he has a name for it yet, but it'll be in Orlando the end of February, January. I forget. I think February, the end of February. It's like a week before MegaCon Orlando, and I'll be at MegaCon as well. Um, I'll be at Heroes Con next year, Baltimore Con next year. So I'm still be doing a few cons next year, but I don't have my uh, schedule written in stone yet.
awesome. Well, I hope to be able to actually catch up with you and shake your hand at Baltimore Comic Con next year. I know it's going to be the 25th anniversary one, so it ought to be some cool stuff happening there, I hope.
Very nice.
Um, so if people want to get in touch with you to keep up with your convention schedule, or they want to be able to get a commission from you, do you have a website, or what would be the best way for people to contact you?
I do have a website, and it's a real easy one, bobmcleod.com. Um, you can always find me on Facebook, message me on Facebook. I have an email, my email is my last name .bob, mcleod.bob@gmail.com. They can always email me. But yeah, my website has a lot of art for sale on it and should mention what conventions I'm going to, and some prints that I have for sale and a lot of stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, everybody, as you could see, hopefully I spelled your
That's
name
it.
right here. Go ahead and go to bobmcleod.com and pick yourself up some artwork from this. As I say, you're considered a comic legend. You've been around the industry for a long time, worked on some timeless stuff, created some great characters that we're all still enjoying. So just as a fan, I just want to say thank you for for all the work that you've done over the years, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me tonight.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And for everyone else out there, like I said, make sure to check out his website at bobmcleod.com. Make sure to check us out on the Codex station and all the different socials. We are about 20 subscribers away from hitting 1,000 on YouTube, when we're going to be doing a massive giveaway of comics and artwork and stuff on there. So make sure that you go check us out on that. And until next time, I'll catch you all by the spinner rack.
All right.